How's everybody doing? So I want to talk a little bit more detail about playing the Arabian tuned Native American style flute and what to expect from that. And so it's still a Native American style flute because it has this configuration of how we play the Native American style flute. However, the holes are in a different placement, gives you a different tuning. This time we're talking about the Arabian scale or the Hijaz scale. There's more than one Arabian. The most common one we have is Hijaz, or Hijaz, some people might say. And this is the way the holes look. Let's take a look at that first off. These are tuning holes, so pay no attention to those. And do you see, first thing that you're going to want to know is that you will have to have a good finger spread, a good reach on your bottom fingers between the middle and ring finger, the first two holes. I call that hole 1 and 2. Don't confuse that with this and this. So holes 1 and 2 have quite a bit of a finger spread there, as you can see that. And so if you think that's going to be a problem, this is just a G, and we might be going an inch and a quarter, or sorry, an inch and 3/4 finger spread between the bottom two holes there. And so that's quite a bit for a lot of players there. Yeah, we can offset it. That might help a little bit. And as you can see, that's as close as we can make them, because if all the holes, for example, were the same size, this hole would be here. The other hole would be way up here. So keeping in mind, when you have an Arabian flute, be expecting the holes to be various sizes. This will be the smallest hole, and this will always be the largest hole. That's what gives it that really unique sound, is the half step that goes all the way to a step and a half. That gives it that real haunting sound. So that's how you get it. And so the only way that we can even make these manageable is to make the bottom hole really small, the next hole quite a bit large, and it can get even larger than that. So be expecting that on a Hijaz tuned Arabian flute. And if that seems like a problem, of course, you can always go with a higher pitched one. We have these as high D, this here is a high C, and then you can get into an inch and a half finger spread or so. And if someone wants a really bassy Arabian flute, there might even be a chance that we're going to go ring finger, pointer finger, and then make a thumb hole for the third hole so that it's even manageable to reach. That's what we do with our contrabass flutes. And on bass Arabians, probably even low E potentially, or low D for sure, and then lower, we're probably going to want to put a thumb hole in there to make it a manageable finger spread. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Another thing to keep in mind is when you choose this, it's probably a good idea that you already have learned some breath control, because one of the things that is a factor in creating flutes and also playing flutes is that the hole size has a lot to do with how much breath pressure that you can place on a flute without it overblowing. So you will find that if you have a Native American style flute with large holes, you probably can blow harder without any squeaks or anything like that, or without maybe some kind of shrill, shrieky sound in the note. And so on Arabians, generally speaking, because we have to make this hole so small, this little half step hole, you're gonna wanna have some breath control, because oftentimes if you blow too hard, it might wanna kick over to a high octave when you don't want it to. It might sound a little bit maybe hissy. Maybe I can see if any of these do that. You can hear it has a little bit of a hiss. Let me play around with these and see if I can show you what I mean. So you can see that you're going to want to have a little bit gentle of a breath, because you are the one that is in control of the sound that comes out of it. So it's good to keep in mind that in order to get this note to sound clear and really nice, you're going to want to have some breath control. You can't expect on an Arabian style flute with these very small holes that they're just going to come out real clear with a lot of volume. So you're going to want to reserve your breath on the bottom notes. And of course, you can increase your breath pressure as you go up the scale. So I'm just resting my breath in there. I'm not blowing really hard. So if I really want to push with a lot of volume, expect a little bit of breath, but also there's going to be a spot where it's going to want to kick over. And you have to have, you know, it's our responsibility to learn breath control to get the best out of our flute. So those are two things that are really important to keep in mind on an Arabian flute. Another thing is the highest note of the scale is not in the same place as a Native American style flute. The highest note of the scale doesn't mean it's the highest note you can achieve, but of the scale. So the high G note is actually there. So the scale is high note, all fingers covered. Depending on the flute, I just sometimes crack that hole little, or you can just blow harder, all fingers covered. That's all achieving the same high G, but generally speaking, that's traditional how you would achieve that note. And as you can see, another thing to keep in mind in purchasing an Arabian flute or a Hijaz flute is, as opposed to a Native American style flute, we are not holding this down any longer. And if you play the Native American style flute, you will be aware that that actually gives you a nice balance point to hold the flute. You have two thumbs in the back, you have this pinky down, or I mean this ring finger down, and it's a well-balanced flute. So that, we're going to have to remove that. So now you have to be tricky with your balance. I don't know if you can see that, but I'm balancing with both pinkies and both thumbs. Of course, your mouth is on there. That stabilizes everything, right? And that's the way that you have to balance the flute now, because you don't no longer have this ring finger to help keep the balance for you. So you can see this is down, and my thumbs are down. So that's another thing. Another thing about Arabian flutes that is a sweet perk is extended high octave range. It's very common on the Arabians and Aeolian flutes to have an extended high octave range. So the Native American style flutes, you probably already know, they don't typically have an extended high octave range. They do have high octave notes. That's different than just blowing harder on the flute and being able to go up the scale. You can achieve that on some Native American style flutes, and I've met, and one of my flute teachers that taught me how to make flutes really could make, you know, 2 full octaves on pitch, but there's some really complicated things you have to do, really small bore size, really long flutes. For example, if you wanted a 2 octave G minor flute, you would probably make the bore 1/2 inch bore, little tiny thing. Most G Native American style flutes are in 7/8 bore like this. The reason being is that because of this reed here, this is a little secret. All you makers are going to steal this secret here. So this reed system, right, the double chamber flute with the sound block on top, this is where the sound is produced, and what gives you the ability to achieve a high octave range is the distance between where the sound is produced and the top hole. And because a Native American style flute starts after the fundamental note, the first note in the scale is 1.5 steps, that brings all the notes way up here. That's why you can't get a high octave range. If I was trying to get a 2 full octave range, which I can do on some flutes, I don't try that on Arabians all the time. I more go for the most comfortable finger spread. But, you know, there's some that I absolutely get inch and, or let's say 1 3/4 octaves on it. But most all these flutes, even this 7/8 bore G, can get an octave and a half, meaning half of the scale you can blow harder and achieve a high octave range, usually in pitch too. And so I'll show you how to do that. So basically it's blowing harder. If you need a little assistance, you can just crack that top hole just a little bit. I wouldn't take it all the way off, but you can just let a little air out of there. It's almost like how a thumb hole is on a recorder. Let a little air out and blow and lift these up. You have to experiment with each flute, what it's gonna like best to sound in pitch when you're doing the high octave. And it has to do with blowing quite a bit harder. So lower octave. And I'll just try the bottom 3 high octave. And so I blow quite hard. I'm blowing on that to really make sure that they come out in pitch and also don't drop, because it's pretty embarrassing if you're performing and you don't put enough breath pressure and it kicks to the low octave. One of the ways that you can assist that where you don't have to blow as hard is cracking that note. This is how it sounds when I crack the top hole. It's a lot easier. I think it sounds maybe a little breathier that way. It's something to keep in mind though. When you're blowing that hard on a flute, the second octave is always going to be breathier than the lower octave because you're just pushing that much more air through. Something to keep in mind. So that does it for now. I hope you enjoy that. I'll play just a quick little ditty on this Hijaz Arabian Native American style flute. And I hope you enjoy. Subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. All right.